Solving quadratic functions, but this time we're going to use the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula will work for any type of quadratic function I'm trying to solve. I want to go ahead and review when we're graphing or solving a quadratic function. You can always solve it by looking at the graph. Remember, we're looking at the zeros or our x-intercepts. Sometimes we will see two possible solutions, such as on this one where I have a solution of -2 and +2. Sometimes we'll see just one solution, like right here where my only zero or x-intercept is at 3. And in the third graph, we see that the parabola is not crossing the x-axis at any spot, so we would have no real solutions. So there are three types of answers I might have: two solutions, one solution, or no solutions. Here we go, what you've all been waiting for, our quadratic formula. Well, it might look a little confusing at first. It's very long, but all it says is -b, which means the opposite of your b value, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, and the whole entire thing divided by 2a. Now you might be asking yourself, what do you mean by a, b, and c? Well, when our quadratic equation is written in standard form, where we see our x squares, our x's, and our constants, our a is always the coefficient that's in front of the x squared. So in this problem, the a would be a 1. The b is always the coefficient to your x, so b in this one would be 2. And your c is always your constant. So in this one, our c would be -8. Before we move forward, there's one thing I want to make sure that we have crystal clear and that we understand. If you were to ever try to find the square root of a negative number and type it in your calculator, it's going to say there's an error. There are no real solutions here. And the reason for that is, remember, square root is really just, it's unsquaring something. And there is nothing that you could go ahead and multiply times itself to get a negative number. -8 times -8 is still going to be +64. And the only way I could get a negative number would be to multiply a negative number and a positive number together. Well, that's now defeating the whole purpose of squaring something, because I need both of them to be the exact same. So just remember, there is no real solution anytime you try to square root a negative number. Why did I remind you about that? Remember, in the quadratic formula, there's this whole big thing right here where we're trying to find the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. We call this number inside the square root our discriminant. If it is greater than 0, that's when you're going to end up with two solutions. If it ends up equaling exactly 0, the square root of 0 is 0. So when we add 0 or we subtract 0, we still get the same answer. That's when you would have one solution. And if you end up with a negative number in this square root sign, that's a no real solution. So that's when your graph would look like this, and I would have no solution since it's not crossing my x-axis. Let's go ahead now and practice actually using the quadratic formula. So remember, we said that the a is the number in front of our squared. So a would be 1 in this problem. B is the number in front of your x. So b would be our 2. And then c is our constant. So c is the number all by itself. So c would be -8. So let's go ahead and first plug all these numbers into this formula where they go. So the first thing, it says opposite of b. Well, the opposite of 2 is -2. Then we see a plus and a minus, the square root of b squared. So 2 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is -8. And then I'm going to divide the whole entire thing by 2 times a, which is 1. So we plugged in our numbers. Now let's try to go ahead and simplify and solve some of this. Let's go ahead and solve the part inside of our square root, our discriminant first. I'm just going to do 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times -8. When we solved all of that, I ended up with 36 right there. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite our problem. We have -2 plus or minus the square root of 36, all divided by 2 times 1, which is 2. Now, since I have a positive number here, we're going to end up with two solutions to this problem. Let's go ahead and simplify. What is the square root of 36? 36 is just 6. So what I really have when I simplify is -2 plus or minus 6, all divided by 2. So I'm going to end up with two problems. I'm going to do -2 plus 6 divided by 2, And I'm going to do negative 2 minus 6 divided by 2. Let's write them both down. The first one, whenever we add it, negative 2 plus 6 is positive 4. 4 divided by 2 is 2. So our first solution is 2. I'm going to go ahead and write that inside of my set. And the other one, whenever I do negative 2 minus 6, that's negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. So my other solution is negative 4. So I have two solutions to this problem. There are two zeros. There's two places this graph is crossing my x-axis. Another one. Go ahead first and identify what are going to be your a, b, and c. So I know my a is the number in front of my x squared, so it's going to be 3. My b is the number in front of my x, so it's going to be negative 6. Be very careful with, don't forget the negative sign, and my c is just my constant, so the c is a 2. Let's go ahead and plug in these numbers into our quadratic formula. It starts off with the opposite of b. Well, since negative 6 is b, the opposite of b is just a positive 6. So we have 6 plus or minus the square root of. Now we have b squared. So I need to make sure I'm taking negative 6. I need to put that in parentheses since I'm squaring it. If I do not put it in parentheses, it's not going to give me the right answer. The signs are going to be backwards. Minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. So let's go ahead and simplify our discriminant first. What do we get whenever we take negative 6 squared, which is 36, minus whatever 4 times 3 times 2 is, which is 24. Well, 36 minus 24 is 12. So everything inside of the square root symbol is 12. So we have 6 plus or minus 12, all divided by 6. So I have a number that is greater than 0. So I do have two solutions to this problem. Now, here's where we need to go ahead and simplify this sum, okay? So the square root of 12 is not a nice perfect number. If I type it in my calculator, I'm going to get a decimal, a 3 point something that keeps on going. So let's go ahead first and simplify 12. Remember, when I'm simplifying a radical, I ask myself, what are all the different numbers I can multiply together? I'm going to break it down as small as possible. So the square root of 12 is the same thing as doing the square root of 2 times 3. So anytime I have a pair, I can take them out. So what that's really the same thing is 2 square root of 3. Right, what we have here now. So we have 6 plus or minus. Remember, we said square root of 12 is the same thing as 2 square root of 3, all divided by 6. Now let's see if we can simplify this first of all in any way. Well, I have a 6 here. I have 2 square root of 3 and a 6 here. Let's look at our nice whole numbers. My whole numbers are 6, 2, and 6. Is there anything I can divide all of them by? And it has to be all 3 of them, not just 2 of them. It has to be all 3 of them. I can divide all of them by 2. If I divide them all by 2, we're going to end up with a 3 there, a 1 there, and a 3 there. So we end up with 3 plus or minus 1 square root of 3, all divided by 3. I cannot simplify this anymore. My answer is this. I'm going to do 3 plus whatever the square root of 3 is, and I can write a 1 there, or I can take it off. It's like having an x, and sometimes we'll write a 1 in front of it, but I don't have to have it there. And then divide it by 3, and I'm also going to do 3 minus the square root of 3, all divided by 3. This is a lot to take in. Let's try it one more time. Identify your A, B, and C first. So our A here is 5. Our B is going to be negative 2. And our C here is going to be positive 4. So let's go ahead and plug these numbers into our quadratic formula. The opposite of B is 2 plus or minus the square root of. We have negative 2 squared. I'm putting it in parentheses. Minus 4 times A, which is 5, times C, which is 4, all divided by 2 times 5. Let's first simplify our discriminant. What do we get when we do negative 2 squared is 4, and 4 minus 4 times 5 times 4? End up with negative 76. So if we were to really look at this, what we really have here is we have 2 plus or minus negative square root of 76, all divided by 10. Well, inside my discriminant, I have a negative number. So what does that tell me about my solutions? Remember, I can't find the answer to a negative square root. That's no real solutions. So I will have no real solutions on this one. My parabola is not crossing the x-axis at any spot. And you go ahead and you get a negative number inside there, I ask always go back and double check and make sure that you put parentheses around, especially if it was a negative number here. But as we see, if we do 4 minus all of this, there's no way I'm going to end up with a positive number. So no real solutions.